When Europeans came to North America, some of the discoveries that they made, along with the wonderful forests and other resources that they were excited about, they also discovered that their favorite diet was no longer completely available to them. Initially, the various wheat and barley crops that they grew in Europe didn't do well in North America. And it took a while before things like wheat began in the process of kind of figuring out what could survive and what could thrive in the new environment and soils. The Europeans who lived side by side with native people began by not so much by choice but by necessity to adopt Indian forms of food. And what you see here is not entirely Indian, but certainly very strongly influenced by native food. So, for instance, corn, which was developed by native people and then adopted by Europeans, the grain of it became the source of much of their food. So porridge, for instance, and a whole variety, and of course it could be powdered and made into a whole variety of bread-like substances. And so corn becomes a kind of foundational food, even after wheat becomes resurges, and the baking of bread and the providing of those kinds of more European style foodstuffs. Corn remains very important in the diet of pioneer families. Another native crop that becomes available to Europeans are beans, legumes, which were developed by native people and again adopted very high in nutritional value and actually probably improved the diet of Europeans who came here. There were many different varieties of beans and they could be used to thicken soups. They could be cooked and prepared in a variety of ways, baked and so on. And it expanded actually what was a fairly limited kind of diet that was reserved almost entirely to pork and wheat and dairy products. Now, one area of food that came with Europeans is the poultry. And so eggs, for instance, which were almost entirely a female produced item in the sense that not only are the hens female at producing the eggs, but women were the ones who often kept the fowl for the household and produced the eggs. And eggs become and remain important elements of all sorts of cooking that women did. Now, the garden yielded not just food and feed for animals and so on, but it also yielded containers. And so these gourds that would be grown in the garden and dried could then be made into various vessels to hold and process and store so much of these foodstuffs. Now, a proper Anglo-European household also had items that were brought in from England and through the Atlantic trade, and one of those items would be sugar. This is the way in which sugar was initially made available to people. It's a cone, it's rigid, and essentially what you would do is you would shave off a bit of sugar. But sugar was expensive, and it wasn't something that was ordinarily used in everyday things unless you were a very wealthy household. Other kinds of items might be tea or coffee. By the period of the American Revolution, coffee becomes a political statement because of the rejection of English items such as tea, or English procured items such as tea. And so a variety of Other kinds of potables could be available as well, with setting tea aside, coffee of course, but sassafras tea, and of course all housewives knew how to brew beer. Beer, ale, and if you had honey, mead. So all of those things would be the purview of the colonial housewife, who again is producing these things for the comfort and health, nutrition, and enjoyment of their family.